we have only used the W-2 model.
Got it.
So even when we were just a two-wheeled shared mobility startup, when everyone else was using gig labor for battery swapping and everything else, we did not. So one of the things about our model, one of the reasons why we've been able to hire now over 1,500 New Yorkers, and again, that number's only growing, is a lot of folks are fed up with maybe the incumbent way of doing things within rideshare. You have to take on all the risk, all the insurance, the vehicle financing, the licensing, everything. It's gotten to the point where in big markets like New York, you really have to drive more than 50 hours a week to kind of make it ends meet.
Welcome to the Rideshare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
Frank Reig is Revel's co-founder and CEO. He launched a company in 2018 with COO Paul Suhey, initially offering electric mopeds in Brooklyn. Since 2021, Revel has focused on expanding its EV fast charging network and all-electric rideshare service. Frank, a Columbia University graduate with an MPA in environmental science and policy, also previously worked as a chef in top NYC restaurants like Gramercy Tavern. Frank, how are you doing today?
Harry, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to chat, and I'm sure your experience as a chef helped you with this new rideshare company that you're building. Is that about right?
You know, I always tell people maybe the best training ground for a startup is high-end kitchens.
Yeah.
You learn sense of urgency, you learn teamwork, collaboration, you learn long hours, low pay. It's all kind of perfect for what you need for a startup.
Very cool. So being an entrepreneur, it's one of the things I love about the gig economy and driving rideshare, delivering, is I tell people it's great practice for running your own business. And so I like that. And I imagine too, now with the popularity of these shows, The Bear and that movie, about the chef, right? Everyone actually knows what it was like for you working as a top chef, huh?
Absolutely. I do think shows like The Bear are a little bit exaggerated. I would say in general, a little less drama and yelling, but
yeah,
they are definitely intense.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm excited to dig into Revel today. So give me the quick pitch and what makes it unique.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, Revel operates an all-electric, all-employee rideshare service in New York City today. We have a fleet of over 500 vehicles. I think one of the things that makes us very unique is that we control the entire business. We are building out a dense network of fast charging infrastructure throughout New York City. So we're owning and operating the charging infrastructure. We are getting the vehicle into drivers' hands that are employees, and we're controlling the tech and the brand. So really, instead of talking about all electric rideshare in 2030, we're doing it right now, today, scaling it in New York City, which is super exciting.
Yeah, that's cool. What is the hardest part about owning that full value chain, if you had to pick one?
If I had to pick one, I think on the charging infrastructure side, if I just go there for a second, the biggest issue is building fast charging at scale in big cities. The power grid is so constrained everywhere. So it is extremely hard to find locations with power, getting power upgrades from the utility. Timelines can be multiple years, not months. So it's just really difficult. That's one of the reasons why cities here in the US just lack so much charging.
Got it. And when you say fast charging, what do you mean by that?
No, great question. So everything that Revel is building is level 3 fast charging. So that charges a car to an 80% level in, let's say, 10 to 20 minutes. So all of the chargers that we're putting in the ground or 150 kW speeds or faster. For comparison, level 2 is maybe what you see in some cities. That's like curbside charging. That might be like 7 kW and maybe take 8 or 10 hours to charge a car. So very different charging speeds.
Okay, cool. And I guess the good analogy for the level 3 fast charging would be sort of like the Tesla Super. I think the minimums are usually around 150 kW, but I've seen some now that are 250 or maybe even higher than that around some of the newer locations.
Correct. Yeah, the Tesla supercharger network would be the best analogy.
Cool. And so I know that, like I mentioned in your bio, you were initially offering electric mopeds. And, we won't spend too much time on this because I know you guys are a new company now. I like the sort of all electric, all employee rideshare tagline that you mentioned, but tell me a little bit about that initial model with mopeds. And it sounds like, was it a pivot to rideshare, or are you guys all rideshare now, or how does it work? Because I'm sure that some people still know of you as the moped sharing company, right?
That's correct. This company started back in 2018, started as a shared electric moped company. And that was this company from 2018 through 2020. Long story short, we started with a small pilot in Brooklyn in 2018 with 60 plus mopeds. By the time we were in the summer of 2020, we had 6,000 mopeds across the country in multiple markets.
Wow.
Starting basically in late 2020, though, Harry, so really for the last 3 years, this company, companies don't like to say the word, but has really done a hard pivot.
Got it.
To the point where leadership focus, all of our capital, is going to scaling and growing our all-electrical employee rideshare service combined with fast charging infrastructure. So that was a pivot that we started doing about 3 years ago.
Got it. And what was the impetus for that pivot?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. When we were growing the moped business, the biggest barrier to us growing that business wasn't government permits, wasn't hiring, wasn't tech. It was, can I find one place in New York or San Francisco that is an industrial site to charge moped batteries, and that site has more than a 200 amp or 400 amp service? And the answer was usually no. I remember we had to delay our launch in San Francisco a year because then I could not find one spot in that city to charge moped batteries.
Wow.
And here I am thinking, okay, they're talking about this EV transition where every truck and bus and rideshare vehicle is going to go electric in 10 years. And I can't find a spot anywhere to charge moped batteries. So it started to open up my eyes to, I call it the chicken or egg problem.
Yeah.
There's no infrastructure in cities to charge EVs because nobody quite has an EV yet, especially when you're talking about city centers. And since who the hell wants an EV if there isn't charging infrastructure that's reliable, accessible, and everywhere? Yeah. So you're kind of stuck in this chicken or egg problem. So that led to, hey, we need a strategy that is a little more Tesla-like, fully integrated. So if you use the Tesla analogy, Tesla 10 years before anybody else built out this massive network of fast charging infrastructure to sell cars. And then guess what? 10 years later today, that network is extremely valuable. And I would say is maybe their competitive mode against anybody else. We're doing the same thing just in big rideshare markets in their urban center. So building out a dense network of fast charging infrastructure to sell rides. But however, we all know 10 years from now, this network of charging infrastructure that we are building for anybody else is going to definitely be that competitive mode.
Got it. And why weren't you able to sort of build out that charging network, but still, use it to charge mopeds? Why did you need to sort of bring in the vehicle and the rideshare component?
Yeah. So if you just think about our business at an economic level, Harry, if we were just a charging company, right? We were just selling electrons. Yeah. And there's a bunch of them out there, EVgo, Electrify America, there's a bunch. If you pulled up, Harry, with your Tesla Model Y, and we gave you a 50 kWh charge, and we're charging 50 cents a kWh, say we were making 10 cents margin on that kWh, we just made $5 off your charge. Yeah. Right? That's a business. But imagine, Harry, you're pulling up in your Tesla Model Y and you're a Revel rideshare vehicle. And I gave you 50 kWh of charge of electrons. And then you go out on a 12-hour rideshare shift and make $500 in revenue at 10% margins. I just made $50. So off the same exact energy, I made 10 extra margin. Got it. So that's what gets me excited about our business, about our integrated model. The fact that we are integrated, selling rides allows us to, guess what? Build out even more infrastructure way before anybody else to sell even more rides. Yeah. So it's really the self-fulfilling flywheel.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned kWh. Well, what is the Tesla battery? I mean, it's pretty big, right? I imagine just even the size, right, of like filling up a Tesla compared to a moped, I imagine that there's a 3 or 4x or maybe more, difference, right, for, kind of similar miles, right?
Depending on the EV, depending on the size of the EV, call it batteries usually 60 to 90, Yeah, got it.
I also like that we're bringing math into this podcast so early. So I commend you. You're ready. You're going for it.
I mean, at the end of the day, it just helps you understand why we're so excited about this business, why our investors are excited. Having this integrated operating model allows us to do things others can't.
Got it. So let's spend a little time on Revel's employee driver model. What's it like to be an employee rideshare driver for Revel?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done as a company, even way back in 2018, Harry, you mentioned earlier when we were only a shared electric moped company, we have only used the W-2 model. Got it. So even when we were just a two-wheeled shared mobility startup, when everyone else was using gig labor for battery swapping and everything else, we did not. So from the founding of this company, we always have used W-2 labor for customer support agents to battery swappers to now our 1,500 plus W-2 drivers in New York. And that number is only growing by the week. So one of the things about our model, and one of the reasons why we've been able to hire now over 1,500 New Yorkers, and again, that number is only growing, is a lot of folks are fed up with maybe the incumbent way of doing things within rideshare. You have to take on all the risk, all the insurance, the vehicle financing, the licensing, everything. It's gotten to the point where in big markets like New York, you really have to drive more than 50 hours a week to kind of make ends meet. So you're kind of forcing most drivers before they pay insurance and their vehicle financing and everything else. You really need to drive 60 hours a week. A lot of drivers are not up for that.
Yeah.
So we offer a very different model. Come drive for us. We take on all of the cost structure of the business when it comes to insurance and vehicle financing and things like that, vehicle maintenance. Just come and drive.
Yeah.
Just worry about that aspect of the business. And clearly it's resonating within driver circles here in New York. Again, we've probably hired 1,000 drivers in the last 7-8 months. So we're really starting to accelerate the growth of our business.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess one sort of thing we should talk about briefly, we'll dive into the New York City market, but, in New York City, all rideshare drivers are required to have commercial insurance and, be licensed by the TLC, right? So it's sort of almost like, a high barrier to entry, right? Compared to like driving for Uber in Los Angeles, like, hey, good old Harry over here, I sign up with my personal insurance, get my car on, and I'm driving, within a day or two, right? There is that high barrier to entry. And so, I feel like your kind of pitch makes even more sense in the New York City market, where, like you said, really, you have to do 50 to 60 hours a week, to kind of make it worthwhile. And just to, put things in context, right? It's like $500-600 a week to rent a vehicle from a fleet owner, I believe, to drive Uber or Lyft in New York City, which is what most people do. And so I kind of imagine that your pitch is it, don't drive for them, come drive for us. Is that kind of like the easy pitch?
I mean, you hit on those vehicle rental costs on a weekly basis. I had a driver tell me the other day, I went to one of those fleet managers in New York, and a Toyota Camry hybrid was $650 a week.
Yeah.
$650 a week.
Yeah.
Before they see $1,
yeah,
$650 needs to go to just for a vehicle and a plate.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. So you can see why a lot of drivers are coming our way, especially drivers that want to drive 40 hours a week. Not drive 65.
For sure.
It starts to make a lot more sense.
Yeah. And I mean, just to put it in context too, right? Let's say for round numbers, I'm not as good as math as you, but 600 a week, if that's the rental cost and you're doing $30 an hour, which is pretty good. You're making $30 an hour. It sounds good to me. That's 20 hours that you have to work before you even break even, right? So like you said, all right, then now everything on top, and, you are responsible for gas in those situations. So I think this pitch is pretty compelling. You may know that, while I was in New York City, I took my first Revel ride. I wouldn't say I grilled my driver, but I had a good conversation with him. And I will say that this was exactly what he told me. He was driving 50, 60 hours a week for Uber and Lyft. He came over to Revel and sort of, got all of the benefits, benefits there from what we discussed basically. So I guess like talking about what it's like to be a driver for Revel, because the number one thing that we always hear from drivers is like, how much do I make? Is that even what do you tell drivers how much they make? Like, how do you think about like, hey, you don't have all the expenses, or do you pitch like, here's how much you make? Like, how do you think about that driver pay component?
Yep. So let's just go right into numbers. So
Sure.
Our average pay last month in September was about $22 an hour.
Cool.
And then they keep all tips. So if you figure tips are around $3 an hour of driving for us, you're talking in that, $24 to $26 range.
And they have no rental costs, no insurance, no gas, right? Because you guys charge all the cars.
They're an employee, Harry. They come and drive. That's all they got to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's like a huge thing, right? I mean, right now, gas prices are literally spiking. It's the number one issue with our audience right now. I mean, gas is $6-7 a gallon. And if you're driving Revel right now, like, who cares, right? Well, as a driver, who cares? I don't know. Maybe you guys have other costs to worry about. But if I'm a driver, it's like kind of nice. Like, I wouldn't say shut up and drive, but it's like, that's all I have to do is think about is like, just drive. Maybe that's a better tagline than shut up and drive, huh? Just drive.
Thankfully, our electricity costs are not the equivalent of $7 a gallon, not even close, which again helps our, entire model. And the other piece is we haven't talked about it, and this is education on our part that we're constantly trying to improve upon. Since you're a W-2 driver with us, you get certain benefits. You get things like paid time off.
Yeah.
You get a mandated amount of sick days by New York State every year. You get things like unemployment insurance and disability insurance. So God forbid is another, COVID epidemic and everything shuts down. Guess what? You'll have unemployment insurance. So just communicating that to drivers, making sure they understand that, making sure that drivers that want it, they have the same exact access to the healthcare plan that I do as CEO, right? So that also takes just constant communication and work on our part, because drivers are almost like, wait, what? I'm not like, I don't believe you.
Yeah. Well, I will say
we have to.
I mean, so far it's like, all right, we've talked about all the positive. It does sound a little too good to be true, right? It's like, hey, I can make more. I don't have to put miles on my car. What are some of the downsides that drivers experience? What's the sort of typical workday for a Revel driver look like?
Yeah. Well, just one last thing about the downsides from a company perspective. We're very realistic about where this model can work. No offense to the cities about the name, but we're never going to bring this to a Charlotte or a Tampa or a Nashville. It just isn't going to work. I was literally in Phoenix last week. So this is real life. I got a Uber trip for $4.86 to go, I don't know, maybe a mile or so. I looked at what the driver got in his app. When I got in the car, it was $3. We're never going to be in Phoenix.
Yeah.
I can't make that business work. I can't compete against a $4.86 trip where the pickup time was 9 minutes and my actual trip was 10 plus. That doesn't work, right? So we're only in markets where there is a ton of demand, where pricing is rational, like in New York, where a 2-mile trip in New York can easily be $50. So I think as a company, we just need to be very realistic about where this model works. And it works in the biggest, densest, most profitable rideshare markets. And that's only where it works. So I think just like from a high level macro perspective, not having blinders on about where it might work, where it doesn't, if that makes sense.
How do you describe Revel like in the context of rideshare? Do you talk about it as a specialty service, a high end, a direct competitor to Uber and Lyft? Like how do you want to be positioned, and how do you position it?
Yeah. We try and be very realistic that folks don't pay for the green premium. Yes, it's all employee. Yes, it's all electric. I can't expect folks to pay 40% more for that.
Got it.
So we don't price like an Uber Black. You've used the service in New York, Harry. We really try and keep our pricing to UberX pricing, regular Lyft pricing, so that we think of it as, hey, as a user, when you use our service, you're basically getting a free product upgrade. You know exactly the type of car you're getting. You know you're getting an employee driver. You're getting that consistency. But you're not getting the Uber Black pricing alongside of it. And again, because we're in markets where pricing is very rational and profitable, that's the only place we're going to be.
Got it. And obviously, you guys are using, I don't know if we talked about this yet, but you have a fleet of, I believe, Tesla Model 3 and Model Ys. Is that the primary vehicle in your fleet?
So we have a mix of Model 3s and Model Ys, and we just started also sourcing Kia Niros. I would say right now we're OEM agnostic. We're looking at all of the different EVs coming out to the market and trying to see which is the best one for us. A combination of experience and pricing and things like that. But today, most of our fleet is Tesla Model Ys and 3s.
Got it. And I mean, I believe one of the most popular vehicles for all these fleet owners in New York City is the Toyota Camry. you already mentioned that. And a Tesla Model 3 or Y is a lot nicer than a Camry, at least in my opinion, and I think more expensive. So do you have additional costs there, right? You guys are pricing it about, we don't need to go like super deep on the numbers, but hey, if you guys are offering, paying drivers more, offering a better service, kind of nicer cars, you have some additional costs. Like where is that delta? Like how are you making it up on the back end, basically, on the business model?
Yeah. So today we run 500 vehicles, Harry, out of 3 depot locations.
Got it.
So for those that are listening, drivers commute to our depot, pick up a car to start their shift that's already clean and charged. They drive 10, 12 hours, come back to that depot, drop off the car and go home. So that is how we operate 500 cars today out of 3 different locations, 2 in Brooklyn, 1 in Manhattan. And we're about to actually add a Queens depot shortly. Cool. So for our 4th depot. The reason why I bring that up is multiple drivers are using the same car. So across our entire fleet, call it each car is doing over 100 hours per week.
Wow.
So you're able to spread out costs like, yes, a Tesla Model 3 might be $7,000 more expensive than a Toyota Camry, but since we're using it for 110 hours, not 45, you start to see how that math works.
Gotcha. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of, I think it's pretty well known that EVs have the lower maintenance costs and, sort of less things that can break. And, of course, the gas savings there. So I think that makes sense. So this is one thing that my driver actually brought up specifically. And I think he was excited for this Queens location that you're launching because he lives in Queens. And unfortunately, he told me that I think he said he takes two trains to get, I don't even know what a train is, but, he says he takes two trains to get from Queens all the way to your depot in Brooklyn and has to commute an hour or two each way. So, I think with this model, right, where you are an employee, you're going to a depot to pick up the car. And I think another thing that a lot of people may not realize, right, most of the rides, right, most of the action is typically in every city, it's in like the high dense area, right, like the high socioeconomic, the Manhattans. But typically, you're going to have a depot, that's where real estate's expensive, right? So you kind of go out to Brooklyn or out to Queens. And so I guess talk a little bit about that experience for drivers picking up and dropping off the cars. I mean, I imagine that you probably have a lot of drivers. Where do they live? And, how are you kind of trying to solve that piece?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. When a driver gets hired onto our service and starts to drive for us, we've noticed they got to drive for 2 weeks. Once they drive for us for 2 weeks, boom, before you know it, they're here a year plus. And we've seen that through our retention and folks staying with us.
Got it.
And when folks don't stay for 2 weeks, the number one reason why, Harry, is simply, hey, I live an hour and 20 minutes from your depot, really like what you're doing. It was just too hard for me to commute. So it's interesting you bring that up because that's probably the number one thing. Why do you stop driving for Revel? That's it. So actually, one of the things that we just did over the last couple of months, we now have 50 vehicles operating as part of this pilot. We're allowing certain drivers to actually take the car home. As long as they drive 50 plus hours a week on our service and commit to that, we let them take it home. And it's working quite well. And we have a very long wait list of drivers that want a car to take home. So we're starting to experiment with that model, learn how to maybe scale that model.
100-hour a week utilization in that case, right? So how do you kind of offset that?
Exactly. So one of the ways is all of the Kia Niros that we're using right now in the fleet are actually in that model because they're a cheaper vehicle.
Got it.
And also that's why to make the economics work, you got to drive 50 plus hours.
Got it.
So it's something that we're piloting. We have 50 Kia Niros in that model. We have a lot of driver interest. So we're going to see.
Well, I mean, I definitely, if I'm a driver, I'd rather keep the vehicle than, commute each way. But where do these 50 drivers that have the Niro, where do they charge it?
So that's the thing, though, Harry. Some drivers actually do not want a vehicle. They don't want to park it, be responsible for it. They don't want to charge it because part of this taking it home as well is you have to start your shift with a charged vehicle. So that's kind of part of, you're charging at our stations, you get free electricity. It's a little bit of a nuance, though, of that. We're giving you a car to take home for free. Take it home. But you do have to show up to your shift with a charged car, though. So it's kind of a give and take. So some drivers love that. Some drivers, no way, I'm good. I'm going to come to the depot 4 or 5 times a week, pick up my car, do my 12-hour shift, and go home and have nothing else to do with it. So it just depends on the driver and what they want. So we're trying to offer just another option here to honestly scale faster.
What do you see as the future for Revel in this capacity? Because I kind of imagine, your charging depots, can do lots of vehicles, scale that up a lot quicker. Me as an individual driver, there, like you said, there's some who might want to keep it overnight, but then maybe I need to install a charger at my house, or you know what I mean? It's like, all right, now you're going one by one. What do you sort of see as the future for Revel in that capacity?
Yeah. So the number one barrier for electric rideshare is a good charging experience. That is the number one barrier. Talk to any driver. I'm sure you guys talk to a lot. This is your business. Access to charging or reliable charging experience. That is the number one barrier to a lot of drivers, especially in a city like New York. We are helping to significantly solve that problem, right? So we've publicly talked about this. We're going to have 400 fast charging stalls in the ground in New York by the end of next year. Right? No one else in the city is going to have more than like 24.
Got it.
So we are quickly developing a true network of fast charging across the major rideshare demand areas of New York, so that when you have an EV and you're driving for our service, and let's say you're taking an EV home, like in that model, you have access to a lot of different charging that we have put in the ground.
Got it.
So we're helping to solve that one problem, which is by far the biggest problem of just this EV transition for rideshare, access to charging.
So you mentioned you have 500 vehicles, 3 depots. Are the charging centers, are they at the depots? Or are they, you have satellite locations for charging too. How does it work?
Yep. So all of our infrastructure is publicly available, even our depots. So even our depot locations where we have a lot of Revel vehicles charging, we always have a couple of stalls open for the public, for folks to use. So we're building two different types of sites. We're building those depot sites where, yes, like there might be 20, 25 fast charging stalls, but also 100, 150 spots of parking for our fleet. And then we're also building sites, and we've announced a few of them, and we'll be doing ribbon cuttings on a few in Q4 here in New York, where think gas stations of the future. 20, 40, 60 stalls, really strategic location in the city. There is no parking component. Just come on in and charge, completely public available, no parking fee, no nothing. So truly trying to make the charging experience, let's just say 10x what it is today.
Got it. I mean, it kind of sounds like the Tesla supercharging network, right? Like, hey, basically you guys are building out kind of your own stalls or your own supercharging locations, right? And then I'm guessing that you give Revel vehicles priority, and then there are some stalls available for the public.
So the public can come in and charge at any stall they like. We just usually also reserve a few to make it just visually appealing. Sometimes you can be almost scared if you see a bunch of Revel vehicles. Am I allowed to charge here? So that's more just like a customer experience piece. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned Tesla. They're probably the most similar to what we're doing. We're even building bigger sites than Tesla, although Tesla's building some big sites in the Southwest, let's say. So as an analogy, we have 5 locations in New York in our pipeline of design and construction that are 50 plus stalls or more. So again, we're building very large sites in the middle of New York City, which is exciting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like you mentioned, charging is a huge barrier for, I mean, I would say rideshare, but I think also, general EV owners and customers. And, I mean, I think that's one thing that is really underestimated is like, especially with rideshare drivers, like we've seen a lot more folks in California renting these Tesla Model 3s from Hertz. And, I think the big reason why, well, first of all, Tesla's a cool car. People like Teslas, drivers and riders. They're fun to drive, but more so that supercharging network, right? Especially when you think about like everything we talked about, the dynamics of a rideshare driver and, having, like long shifts, probably don't have home charging, right? Like being able to like go to a, fast charging level 3 station, like get a quick 80% and 10 and 20%, like time is money, right? So you got to get back out there working. So I really do feel like I don't, like I almost feel like you kind of have to drive rideshare in a Tesla. Like I don't know that these other cars are that great a fit unless you have that, kind of like fast charging network built in, which you guys are kind of doing yourself.
Especially in city environments where there is no garage or driveway, right? If you're a rideshare driver, typically in San Francisco or New York or Chicago, you need public access or else this transition is not going to happen.
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of investment, interest, and excitement at kind of what I call like the intersection of EVs and rideshare. First, like, why do you think that is? Is it because they put so many miles a week on their car and it's just like an obvious use case? Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of interest just because of the market size, just first and foremost. If you think about every gas-powered vehicle going electric over the next 10 to 15 years, the amount of investment that needs to go into this industry to make that happen is just massive. So any investment fund is thinking through where can they play within that space because they just see everything heading up and to the right. And then you have all the regulatory tailwinds of everything that's happening as well, where markets like California, New York, everything has to be all electric rideshare, for instance, by 2030. So you just see all these tailwinds and you just think, wow, there's so much investment needed to make this happen. What is the most effective way to deploy our capital, right? So those are the decisions that they're making.
Got it. So this is sort of my last topic. I saved the best for last. I wanted to kind of get your take because you guys are already an all-electric rideshare service. So, I mean, talk about some of these government, I mean, I don't know, are they mandates or sometimes they're sort of more missions? Like you mentioned, okay, so California, all-electric rideshare by 2030. I think NYC, you wrote a recent op-ed that says all rideshare vehicles have to be EV by 2030. I know London is doing some stuff. I think Uber and Lyft have kind of announced EV goals. Like, feel free to lay out, you probably know them better than me, but feel free to like lay out like what's the high level like tailwinds looking like, and what do you sort of think about some of these? Are they gonna happen, kind of BS, more PR? What do you think?
Well, the two most obvious ones are in New York City recently, the Taxi and Limousine Commission, the mayor's office announced, they call it the Green Rides Initiative.
Okay.
So it is clear stepping stones to have all rideshare vehicles. So that's about 80,000 Uber Lyft vehicles, along with Revel. They all must be electric by 2030. That's 6 years from now.
Yeah.
So that's pretty incredible. Right.
So I'm going to say that's not going to happen. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting, though, because the way the regulations are set out, when you actually read them, the incumbents have to have a certain percentage of their total trip volume be electric each year. So in 2024, it's 5%, 2025, it's 15%, 25%. I think it goes to 40, 60, 80, et cetera. And there are penalties, financial penalties, if they don't hit those metrics. Are they very severe financial penalties? No. But considering the trip volume that the incumbents do in a city like New York, it is significant. It does add up.
Yeah.
So, when they're going to have to start paying government penalties, I think that, folks will start to wake up a bit. And then in California, there's a clean mile standard at the state level. So that's the entire state. Essentially, will need to be, I believe it's 100% electric by 2032, and essentially in the low 90s by 2030. So, I'm a little less well-versed in the regulatory sort of penalties with that. And I think there's still work that needs to be done, but these are clearly tailwinds.
Yeah. Well, let's focus on New York for a bit then, since I know you're quite familiar with that market. So Green Rides Initiative, 80,000. So there are 113,000 rideshare drivers in New York City. Is that right? And 80,000 cars. Does that sound about right?
So there's about 100,000 plates total when you add up yellow taxis and livery and Uber Lyft and Revel. It's about 100,000 vehicles. In terms of drivers that have a license, I think it's closer to even like 200,000.
Got it.
Right. So this is a massive industry. It's a $10 billion market in New York City. I think people forget New York City does close to 1 million rides a day.
Yeah.
Right. The next closest markets would be Bay Area and LA that do about 250,000. So New York City is a monster. It's a huge market. It's 100,000 vehicles.
Those rides, for anyone who's taken a rideshare in New York, they're not cheap either. So it's a lot of revenue.
They are not cheap.
Rides. Okay,
hence the $10 billion market there.
Yeah. So we've got, a lot of rides happening. Rideshare vehicles have to be EV by 2030. I mean, most, I would say, from the numbers I've seen, it's like, less than 5%, less than 10% for sure. In some of these bigger markets are EV trips and rides. So like, what do you think needs to happen first to, accelerate that transition? Is it more charging, or is it more, there's also like the actual cost of the vehicles, right? There's a reason why every fleet owner in New York City is buying up all these Toyota Camrys, right? Like, I guess, is it more the vehicle or more the charging that needs to happen first?
I think it's both. So let's take charging first. A city like New York with 100,000 vehicles that do rideshare and taxis, if all that's going to go electric, rough estimates here, Harry, for every rideshare vehicle, for every 10 rideshare vehicles, you essentially need a public fast charging stall. So that means for this entire sector of New York to go electric, you need 10,000 public fast charging stalls in New York City.
Got it.
Revel is a pipeline of 400 by the end of next year. I think everything else in the city will add up to maybe another 100 or two. So you can see we have a long way to go to 10,000.
Yeah. Well, so I guess that's my question. Who's going to build those other 9,500? If I'm a fleet owner with 2,000 or 3,000 vehicles in New York City, I'm not paying for a bunch of chargers, right? Like, it's not really my business. I don't have EVs. I might do a little something here and there. That's kind of why I'm so skeptical of any initiative that's, by 2030, right? Like you said, that's 6 years. Like, I don't physically see or logistically see how that's going to happen and who's going to pay. Like, it just doesn't seem realistic to me.
Well, a big piece of this is that's just our pipeline through next year, right?
Yeah.
So a company like Revel is going to be building a lot more charging infrastructure in 2025 and 2027 and 2029. And then the other piece.
So how many of that 10,000 chargers that are necessary by 2030 you think Revel could build?
I would say at least several thousand. Yep. The other piece of this is the vehicles. So I think this, Harry, and maybe some of our listeners out there know New York City has a cap on licenses. Right. They are not issuing more licenses. That needs to change as well. There has to be more EV licenses issued, or else you're really going to stall the transition even more. Because right now, what's going on in a city like New York, Harry, is essentially there's an Uber monopoly, right? And unless more EV licenses are issued, you're stalling two things. How is a driver that's paying $600, $650 a week for a vehicle ever going to actually go get their own license and get their own EV? So you're stopping just independent drivers here in New York from stopping paying $600 a week and go and get their own license. So you're kind of stopping that happening. And then you're stopping innovative companies like Revel that are trying to build the fast charging infrastructure that the city needs. The only way that happens is we have to scale our rideshare business in a very reasonable way alongside of it. So you go back to the EV license cap, that's going to need to change moving forward. They're going to have to issue more.
So I know there's a cap on licenses. Is that the 80,000 vehicle number? Is that what you're calling licenses? Like, what is the cap? So there's a cap on the 80,000 vehicles that can operate right now in New York City for hire. And then I thought there was sort of the workaround. Isn't this what Revel used, that if you were an EV, you could kind of add to that cap? Like, how are you guys adding vehicles right now?
That is how we initially launched. The prior administration took that EV exemption away.
Got it.
So currently that does not exist. So the Tax Limousine Commission earlier this year in March issued 1,000 more licenses, and they were snatched up very quickly by a lot of different folks.
For EVs,
we're going to need more than that for only EVs, electric vehicles.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really like that. That does, so I think that the cap is probably, okay, it is what it is, but I do think like kind of adding that extra incentive, for individual drivers, maybe half are reserved for individuals, half are reserved for fleets, especially for the folks, right? Like if you are, there's a pretty small number of drivers who are out there kind of independently owning and operating, but those probably are the guys and the gals that you want to support, right? It's like they are true business owners, not the, the taxi medallion king, right? Who has 5,000 taxis and, is growing his fleet and making millions of dollars more. So it does seem like providing that extra incentive to go EV would be, kind of like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, because you have a couple of things going on here too. Currently Uber and Lyft have a hiring freeze in New York. So you cannot sign up as a new driver for Uber and Lyft in New York. So you don't have access to even delivering rides, even if you wanted to go rent a vehicle right now. And then you have a whole group of drivers that currently rent from these fleet folks, pay through the roof on a weekly basis. They don't have access to their own license. They constantly have to continue to pay $600 a week. And then you have another group of drivers that want to work for a company like Revel with an innovative model and just be an employee. And we can't hire more unless there are more vehicles out there for us to bring into our fleet, which all goes back to licenses. So it's kind of, that's why I mentioned the Uber monopoly in the beginning, right? Right now, that's really the only choice. So you go back to charging infrastructure and you go back to vehicle licenses. Those are the two issues here.
Well, so definitely, I think we're on the same page 100%. Sounds like we need more EV licenses, to kind of get anywhere close to this 2030 goal.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. And I'm sure you guys are advocating hard for that in New York City right now.
Yeah, I think there's a balance to everything here, right? But at the end of the day, there's a goal for 100% electrification by 2030. It's not going to magically happen unless some things along the way loosen up here. And I think everybody realizes that. Now we just got to figure out the right path forward in the cadence.
Very cool. Well, Frank, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all the details about Revel. I love that you were prepped, ready to go, bringing the stats, exactly what drivers want to hear when it comes to pay, experience, charging. And it sounds like it's a great experience for those in New York City looking to drive for an all-employee, all-electric rideshare service. If folks want to learn more about you and Revel or, see what it's like to be a driver, where can they go? Where should they learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. You can just download our driver app and apply right through there. You can also go to the website, gorevel.com, and apply through there and learn more about the company. If you're based here in New York, you can always drop by the TLC building where we have an office in Queens and come right in and talk to the team on the spot. So either of those.
Cool. Well, Frank, appreciate you coming on and I look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
Thanks, Harry. Appreciate it.